A junior analyst called in sick on a Tuesday. His senior colleague picked up the cue. Routine compliance report. 340 entries. He got to line 14. He made a phone call at 9:47 a.m. By 5:31 the following morning, 12 people were in federal custody simultaneously across 12 different locations. None of them saw it coming. The analyst went back to his desk. That Tuesday started like every other Tuesday in the division. A rotating compliance task. An access log review. The kind of administrative work that moved through the department on a schedule and rarely produced anything worth noting. The junior analyst assigned to the queue was out sick. The report had a submission deadline. His senior colleague picked it up. Not because he suspected anything, because the deadline was that day. The log had 340 entries. Each entry represented an access event, a person, a file, a timestamp, a clearance level. Most access logs resolve clean. An entry falls outside an authorization boundary. A supervisor confirms a valid reason. The flag closes. The cycle repeats. He reached line 14. A civilian intelligence analyst inside the Pentagon's Middle East Policy Assessment Division had accessed 347 classified files over the preceding 8 months. His role authorized access to finished intelligence summaries and regional assessment products. It did not authorize access to operational planning documents. It did not authorize access to force positioning packages. It did not authorize access to infrastructure assessment files. The majority of the 347 accessed records fell into those 3 categories. The automated system had flagged it. Routine overscope event. The kind of flag that produced dozens of entries per month across the Pentagon's access management infrastructure. The resolution process required one check. Was there an informal authorization on file? A supervisor request? A documented project need? There was nothing. 347 accesses. 14 separate sessions. 8 months. Valid credentials. Normal working hours. No technical anomaly in the access pathway. He picked up the phone at 9:47 a.m. What he did not know yet was what those 347 files covered. He was about to find out. The escalation call went up the chain at 9:47 a.m. By noon, a counterintelligence review team was pulling the civilian analyst's full personnel file. By 3 p.m., the financial records request had been submitted. By 6 p.m., the preliminary inquiry team had something that changed everything. The civilian analyst was not alone. Cross-referencing his financial profile against a foreign intelligence compensation database maintained by the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network produced a match. Then another. Then another. 12 Pentagon employees, each showing payments traceable to the same originating financial node. A funding entity identified in a prior counterintelligence case as part of Iran's external operations financial architecture. Not the same payment amounts. Not the same methodology. The same node. One source. 12 recipients. Each of the 12 held a different position inside the Pentagon's civilian and contracted workforce. A defense policy contractor with access to regional command structures. A budget analyst whose portfolio covered infrastructure maintenance contracts for overseas installations. A communications technician connected to the secure network linking Pentagon planning divisions to regional command centers. A senior administrative coordinator managing official travel and personnel movement for senior defense officials. Different roles. Different access levels. Different parts of the same building. One financial origin. The counterintelligence section chief called her supervisor at 6:43 p.m. She said one sentence. "We have a penetration operation and we don't know how deep it goes." That sentence carried a specific meaning in counterintelligence work. It did not mean a single asset had been turned. It did not mean one file had been passed to a foreign service. It meant a network had been built inside the institution, deliberately, over time, with architecture designed to survive. 12 people, one originating node, 8 months of flagged access that had resolved as routine. The section chief had 14 years of counterintelligence experience. She had not seen this before. The question was not whether a penetration operation existed. The question was how long it had been running. That answer was still 4 days away. The section chief spent the next 4 hours in a restricted briefing room. Iran desk analysts, 2 NSA liaison officers, emergency compartmentalization protocols. By midnight she had an assessment. 8 days. Not hours. Days. But the word imminent was on the table. 8 days was not a guess. It was built from 3 separate indicators that had been developed independently and had converged on the same conclusion. The first indicator was signals. NSA retrospective analysis of Iranian military communications over the preceding 6 weeks showed repositioning activity at 3 air defense installations and 2 forward operating locations in the region. The movements were inconsistent with routine rotation schedules. They were consistent with preparation for an offensive operation against fixed U.S. positions. The repositioning had begun 6 weeks earlier. The acceleration had begun 10 days ago. The second indicator was the access pattern. The most recent access cluster from the civilian analyst's log covered 7 files accessed across 2 sessions in the preceding 11 days. Those files contained U.S. installation vulnerability assessments for the same geographic corridor where Iranian repositioning had been observed. What had been accessed and where Iranian forces were moving pointed to the same locations. That was not coincidental. The third indicator was financial. One of the 12 identified individuals had received a payment 3 weeks earlier that was structurally different from every prior payment. Larger amount, different routing pathway, single transfer. In the financial intelligence unit's experience with foreign compensation operations, that payment structure had one meaning: a terminal transaction, final compensation, the kind of payment made to an asset whose operational window was closing, either because the operation was concluding, or because something was about to happen that would make continued access unnecessary. 3 indicators: signals, access pattern, terminal payment, each developed separately, each pointing to the same 8-day window. The section chief briefed the FBI director's office at 8 p.m. There was one problem that no indicator could solve. All 12 subjects had to be arrested at exactly the same moment. Not approximately. Exactly. 12 people. 1 operation. 0 margin for partial action. That was the constraint. It defined everything that followed. If any one of the 12 received any indication that the investigation existed, the IRGC handler network would be alerted. An alerted network would not wait. It would accelerate whatever operational timeline was already in motion. A changed behavior from a colleague. An unusual question from security personnel. A counterintelligence interview request. Any of those signals, reaching any one of the 12, would compress an 8-day window into something considerably shorter. The section chief's assessment was direct. Alerting the network would not end the operation. It would speed it up. That meant the investigation had one viable path. All 12 identities confirmed before any move was made. All 12 locations established and under surveillance. All 12 warrant applications prepared, submitted, and sealed. All 12 arrest teams positioned and ready. Then one signal, simultaneously, to all 12 teams at once. Not 11 and then one more. Not 10 confirmed with 2 probable. All 12. Confirmed. Simultaneously. The FBI had 8 days to do something that typically took months. Identify 12 embedded assets operating across different divisions of the most security-conscious building in the United States. Build legally sufficient warrant applications for each one. Coordinate arrest teams across multiple jurisdictions. Maintain total operational silence throughout. 8 days. 12 subjects. 1 chance. There was no contingency for partial success. Partial success and failure produced the same outcome. The remaining subjects, still inside the building, still with access, would receive the signal that the operation had been exposed. Day 1 started immediately. The civilian analyst from line 14 was confirmed as Subject 1 within 3 hours of the initial escalation. Subjects 2 through 5 were identified by the following morning. Financial cross-referencing was the method. Each new identity emerged from the same IRGC-linked compensation node. Each confirmation required a full sequence before it could be treated as verified. Personnel file review. Financial deep dive, access history reconstruction, communication metadata analysis. Every subject required all 4 before they moved from probable to confirmed. Subject 2 was a defense policy contractor. His access touched regional command structures across multiple theaters. He had been in his current contracted role for 3 years. Subject 3 was a communications technician. His role connected him to the secure network infrastructure linking Pentagon planning divisions to regional command centers. That access level would become significant later. Subject 4 was a budget analyst. His portfolio included infrastructure maintenance contracts for overseas installations. Maintenance contracts contain precise details about facility layouts, structural conditions, and utility dependencies. Subject 5 was a senior administrative coordinator. Her office managed official travel and personnel movement scheduling for senior defense officials. She knew who was going where before almost anyone else did. 5 confirmed by morning. 7 by the end of day 2. Each new subject added a different piece of the access picture. Different division, different clearance level, different category of information. The network had not been built randomly. Each position covered a gap that the others left open. Together, the 7 confirmed subjects had collective visibility across operational planning, infrastructure vulnerability, logistics, communications infrastructure, and senior personnel movement. That coverage was not accidental. Someone had mapped the Pentagon's information architecture and recruited specifically to fill each gap. The biographical assessment team was falling behind. The financial network was producing identities faster than the team could process them. By the end of day 2, the investigation had 7 confirmed subjects and a growing sense that the network had been constructed by someone who understood exactly how the building worked from the inside. Day 3 would confirm how far that understanding went. Subject 8 was a senior contractor. His role was inside a classified program office. His access went beyond operational planning documents. It reached the communication protocols used between the Pentagon and forward-deployed units in the region. That distinction mattered. Operational planning documents describe what is intended. Communication protocols describe how those intentions become orders. Specifically, the encryption keys, transmission schedules, and authentication sequences used to issue commands to forward positions. Intelligence on what was planned told an adversary what to expect. Intelligence on how orders would be issued told an adversary how to interfere with the response once something began. Those are different categories of damage. A separate analytical track was opened for Subject 8, staffed with personnel cleared specifically for the communication programs involved. That track ran parallel to the main investigation through day 3. The results came in at 11 p.m. Subject 8 had accessed the communication protocol documentation on 6 occasions across the preceding 14 months. The dates of those 6 accesses were cross-referenced against his financial payment records. 4 of the 6 accesses had been followed within 48 hours by a deposit from the IRGC-linked compensation node. 4 accesses, 4 payments, each pair separated by less than 2 days. The pattern was unambiguous. The section chief received the day 3 assessment and spent 30 minutes alone in her office. What Subject 8 had accessed was not background intelligence. It was not contextual. It was operational infrastructure. The specific mechanisms through which the United States would coordinate a military response if something happened in the region. That infrastructure was now potentially in Iranian hands. When she called the team back in, her framing had shifted. "We are not just looking at what they knew," she said. "We are looking at what they could do with what they knew." Subject 8's access changed the damage calculation entirely. The network was not just informing Iranian offensive preparation. It was potentially degrading the U.S. capacity to respond effectively once that preparation concluded. The 8-day window assessment was revised. Not because new signals intelligence had confirmed a closer timeline. Because the communication protocol access meant the offensive preparation being tracked by NSA could be more advanced than repositioning data alone had suggested. 6 days remaining. The investigation had identified 8 of 12 subjects. 4 identities were still unknown. The financial network was still being mapped. And then one analyst noticed something small. A payment that looked like a bank fee. It wasn't. The payment was small enough to ignore. Structured like a standard bank processing fee. The kind of entry that appears in financial records dozens of times a month and resolves as administrative noise. The financial analyst reviewing Subject 7's compensation records almost moved past it. She didn't. Something in the routing structure of that small payment matched a pattern she had seen in a prior case. Not the amount. Not the timing. The architecture of how the payment had been routed before it arrived. She flagged it. By midnight on day 4, the investigation had a second node. A parallel IRGC financial infrastructure entity operating on entirely different routing pathways. Separate from the primary node that had identified the first 8 subjects. Using different transfer mechanisms. Different intermediary entities. Different geographic routing points. Both nodes had appeared in the same 2020 counterintelligence case that had originally identified the primary node. At the time, both had been assessed as inactive. Neither had been flagged for ongoing monitoring. The current operation had been using both simultaneously, not as primary and backup, as parallel tracks compensating different tiers of the same network. The primary node had been paying subjects 1 through 8. The secondary node had been paying subjects 9 through 11. 2 separate financial channels. 2 separate groups of assets. 1 unified operation. The redundancy revealed the design intent. If investigators ever found the primary node, 8 subjects would be identified and arrested. The secondary node would remain intact. The 4 subjects connected to it would continue operating inside the building with no indication that any part of their network had been compromised. The operation had been built to survive partial exposure. Without the financial analyst's recognition of that small anomalous payment, that design would have worked. 8 subjects arrested. 4 still in place. Still compensated. Still accessing. With a now unmonitored secondary channel and no reason to change their behavior. The secondary node identification changed the subject count from 8 confirmed to 11 confirmed with 1 probable by morning of day 5. But the second node raised a question the investigation had not yet addressed. The 2020 counterintelligence case had found both nodes and assessed them both as dormant. Someone had made that dormancy assessment. That assessment had allowed both nodes to go unmonitored for years while the current operation was built on top of them. Was the 2020 dormancy assessment simply wrong? Or had something influenced that assessment from inside the same building where the current network was now operating? That question was not resolved during the 6-day investigation. It is not clear that it has been resolved since. What was resolved was the identity of the 12th subject, and that identification was the most sensitive of all 12. Subject 12 held a senior civilian position in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. The financial connection to the IRGC secondary node was confirmed. The access history was reviewed. 23 accesses to files in the highest classification tier available to a civilian employee without special compartmented access. The files were different from what the other 11 had accessed. Subjects 1 through 11 had collectively covered operational planning timelines, force positioning assessments, installation vulnerability profiles, communication protocols, and logistics infrastructure, the tactical and operational layer of what was being prepared. Subject 12 had not accessed tactical files. Subject 12 had accessed the decision-making framework surrounding the operation itself, broad strategic assessments of U.S. regional posture, allied coordination frameworks, the policy authorization architecture that defined the conditions under which the planned operation would be approved, delayed, or halted entirely. The other 11 had been answering the question of what the United States was preparing to do and how it would be executed. Subject 12 had been answering the question of when it would be authorized and what conditions could stop it before it began. Combined, the 12 access histories covered the operation from every angle: the plan itself, the logistics, the communications infrastructure, the vulnerabilities in the installations involved, and the political and policy conditions governing the decision to proceed. That was not a collection of opportunistic accesses. That was a comprehensive intelligence picture assembled deliberately across 12 different positions over an assessed period of 18 to 26 months. The section chief briefed the Deputy Attorney General at 7 a.m. on day 5. The meeting lasted 22 minutes. All 12 warrant applications were approved for simultaneous sealed issuance. 12 arrest teams authorized, each composed of FBI counterintelligence agents coordinated with Pentagon security personnel, each assigned to a single subject, each operating under strict communication silence until the go signal. The operational order specified one window: pre-dawn, day 7. All 12 locations simultaneously. 2 days remained for logistics. What nobody on the team knew yet was that day 5 would produce one more finding. One that would move the entire operation forward by 18 hours and confirm that the network's timeline and the investigation's timeline were converging faster than the 8-day assessment had anticipated. Subject 3, the communications technician, was about to take an unscheduled drive. The surveillance team on Subject 3 documented the movement at 2:17 p.m. on day 5. Unscheduled. No prior pattern. A drive to a parking structure near a government building in Northern Virginia. Subject 3 entered the structure and pulled into a space on the second level. A second vehicle was already there. The two vehicles parked side by side. The contact lasted 12 minutes. The individual in the second vehicle was identified through facial recognition cross-referenced against embassy personnel records. An IRGC external operations officer, operating inside the United States under diplomatic cover. A known member of Iran's foreign intelligence infrastructure. 12 minutes. Vehicle to vehicle. Day 5 of a 6-day window. The section chief's assessment of the contact was immediate. Subject 3 had not gone to that parking structure to pass information. The meeting was too short and too unstructured for a document transfer. He had gone to receive something. Possibly a timeline confirmation. Possibly a signal that the operational preparation was entering its final phase and that the network's collection window was closing. The terminal payment identified earlier in the investigation, the anomalously large single transfer paid to one of the 12 3 weeks prior, now had additional context. It was not simply a closing payment. It was advance compensation for a final collection period. Payment issued before the window closed because after the window closed there would be no mechanism left to pay. The network knew something was coming. The assets had been told. The handler had just confirmed it in person. The arrest window was moved forward 18 hours. Pre-dawn. Day 6. Not day 7. The logistics that had been planned across 2 remaining days were compressed into one. 12 teams. 12 locations. 3 locations inside the Pentagon building itself required coordination with the Defense Protective Service under conditions that prevented disclosure to general Pentagon security personnel. Standard pre-dawn residential entry protocols covered 7 locations. One subject was traveling for a conference in a different city. That arrest required coordination with a separate FBI field office with no advance disclosure to local law enforcement. All 12 teams moved into position through day 5 and into the early hours of day 6 without any cross-team communication. Each team knew its target. No team knew the status of any other team. The go signal would come through a single secure channel simultaneously to all 12 teams. Until that signal, no team moved. At 4:47 a.m. the signal was issued. 12 teams. 12 locations. First contact simultaneous across all 12. Subject 1 was at his residence. Subject 3 was at his residence. Subject 12 was reached at an early morning entry point to his building. The last confirmation came in at 5:31 a.m., 44 minutes from first contact to final confirmation across 12 separate locations in multiple jurisdictions. No subject had communicated with any handler between 4:47 a.m. and the moment of arrest. No subject had known they were under surveillance. No subject had received any signal that the investigation existed. The IRGC handler who had met with Subject 3 in the parking structure was placed under physical surveillance at 5:31 a.m. His personal devices showed no outbound communication during the entire arrest window. The network had gone dark at the moment of first contact. By 6 a.m., the State Department had begun the formal process for the handler's expulsion. The operation was over. What it had left behind was not. The damage assessment took 6 weeks, 14 separate analytical teams, strict compartmentalization throughout. The classified document, when complete, ran to 340 pages. What those 340 pages described was the full scope of what 12 people in 12 different positions had collectively removed from the most sensitive defense planning environment in the United States over an assessed operational period of 18 to 26 months. The precise start date could not be established. The earliest payment records in both financial nodes predated the Pentagon's accessible access log archive. The investigation could confirm when the payments began. It could not confirm when the first file was accessed in service of the operation. That boundary, the true beginning, remains unknown. What is known is the volume. More than 2,400 classified documents. Force positioning assessments. Operational timelines. Installation vulnerability profiles. Allied coordination frameworks. Communication protocols. Strategic authorization architecture. 12 people. 12 positions. Every layer of the planning hierarchy covered. The Iranian military repositioning observed by NSA in the weeks before the arrests was assessed in the damage report as directly informed by intelligence gathered through the network. The repositioning had been in progress when the arrests were made. 3 of the 5 movements had been finalized. 2 remained incomplete. Those 2 halted within 72 hours of the arrests. The assessment's authors noted that the halt pattern was consistent with an adversary that had lost its intelligence feed and was recalibrating under sudden information blackout. An operation that had been moving forward stopped because the picture it had been navigating by went dark. 3 movements had already been completed before the picture went dark. Those 3 positions were not reversed. They are not described in any public document. Their current status is not part of what was disclosed in congressional oversight briefings. The total compensation paid to the 12 subjects through both IRGC financial nodes over the assessed operational period was reconstructed from the full financial analysis. $2.3 million. Distributed across 12 people over up to 26 months. The analytical and investigative cost of the 6-day FBI operation, the 6-week damage assessment, and the 14-month sealed prosecution process was not publicly disclosed. The classified budget summary distributed to oversight described it in one line, substantially exceeding the network's total compensation expenditure. The Pentagon's access management system was revised within 90 days of the arrests. Overscope access flags for civilian personnel were designated as requiring human review within 24 hours. Previously, the window had been 72 hours. The revision took 11 days to draft, review, and approve. The IRGC external operations officer expelled under diplomatic process characterized the action publicly as a fabrication. The State Department did not respond. The 12 subjects were indicted on charges covering unauthorized access to classified national defense information, acting as unregistered agents of a foreign government, and conspiracy to provide material support to a foreign intelligence service. Proceedings ran under sealed conditions for 14 months before portions of the indictments became public. The senior analyst who pulled the compliance report that Tuesday morning returned to his normal rotation the week after the arrests. He was not publicly identified. He processed 46 more compliance reports in the 12 months that followed. None produced an escalation. He checked each one. He is referenced in the post-operational training document distributed to Pentagon security compliance offices as the analyst who treated a 14th-line access flag as worth an escalation call rather than a deferred resolution. That is the full extent of what is publicly known. What is not publicly resolved is the question that surfaced on day 4 and was never formally answered. The 2020 counterintelligence case identified both IRGC financial nodes. Both were assessed as inactive at the time. Neither was placed under active monitoring. The current operation was built on both nodes simultaneously, with a redundant financial architecture specifically designed to survive partial exposure. Someone assessed those nodes as dormant in 2020. That assessment allowed them to remain unmonitored while an operation was constructed on top of them. The investigation that ended at 5:31 a.m. on day 6 did not determine whether that dormancy assessment was an analytical error. It did not determine whether it was something else. The 12 subjects are in federal custody. The handler is expelled. The 2 financial nodes are mapped and closed. The 340-page damage assessment is complete and restricted. The access log archive still does not go back far enough to establish when the operation began. The 3 completed Iranian repositioning movements are still in place. And somewhere in a federal records system, the 2020 case file that first identified both nodes sits with an assessment that called them inactive. No one has publicly explained who made that call, or why.